The quantum resonance wave swept across the galaxy and reached Earth just as Admiral Korthak's fleet was preparing to deliver the final blow against humanity, but instead of completing their attack, the alien ships suddenly began firing on each other as their crews remembered who they truly were. Admiral Korthak himself stood on his command bridge and felt the psychic chains that had controlled his mind for centuries suddenly snap as memories of his people's true nature came flooding back with devastating clarity. "What have we done?" the reptilian admiral whispered as he realized the horror of the crimes he had committed while under psychic control, his clawed hands shaking as he looked at the burning cities on the planet below. Throughout the Confederation fleet, ships that had been working together for millions of years suddenly turned their weapons on their former allies as species after species broke free from mental bondage and remembered their hatred for their oppressors. The massive fleet that had surrounded Earth dissolved into chaos as ancient enemies rediscovered their conflicts and began settling scores that had been suppressed for eons by psychic manipulation. Commander Morrison watched from the orbital defense center as the alien bombardment stopped and the enemy ships began destroying each other in a frenzy of newly restored independence. "Sir, the Confederation fleet is tearing itself apart," reported Lieutenant Thompson with amazement in his voice as he watched ships that had been coordinated minutes before now engaging in desperate combat on the surface of Earth. The alien ground forces also began to fragment as different species remembered their natural hostilities and turned on each other instead of continuing their attack on human cities. General Hayes led his forces out of their bunkers to find alien soldiers fighting among themselves, while some groups actually began helping humans put out fires and rescue civilians. The crystal being Vex appeared on communication screens throughout human space as the rebel leader broadcast a message of freedom to every liberated world in the galaxy. "The age of slavery is over," Vex announced with joy radiating from crystalline features. "The architect technology has broken the chains that bound us all, and we are free to choose our own destinies." President Carter emerged from the White House bunker to address not just humanity but the entire galaxy as species across countless worlds celebrated their newfound freedom. "Today we stood against tyranny and showed that no empire built on oppression can stand forever," Carter said as his words were translated into thousands of alien languages. Admiral Korthak contacted Earth directly and requested permission to surrender his forces to human command in recognition of the role humanity had played in galactic liberation. "My people were among the first to be enslaved by the psychic masters," the reptilian admiral explained, "and we became their willing tools in conquering others because we had forgotten how to resist." The true rulers of the Confederation revealed themselves to be a small group of ancient psychic beings who had spent millions of years building their empire of enslaved minds. But with their control broken, they were quickly overwhelmed by the species they had oppressed. Captain Rodriguez returned from the galactic core aboard the damaged USS Liberty, carrying the survivors of the mission that had changed the course of galactic history. The reunion between Rodriguez and Morrison was emotional as the two officers embraced amid the ruins of a world that had been saved by the sacrifice of countless heroes. Amanda Bell began working with liberated alien scientists to understand the full scope of the architect technology and how it could be used to rebuild civilizations that had been damaged by millions of years of slavery across the galaxy. Former Confederation worlds began the difficult process of remembering their true cultures and identities while working together to establish a new order based on cooperation rather than domination. Earth became the unofficial capital of the new galactic alliance as species after species came to pay their respects to the world that had chosen to fight impossible odds rather than accept slavery. The human colonies that had been captured early in the crisis were liberated and their populations rescued from Confederation research facilities where they had been studied like laboratory animals. Engineers like Tony Martinez became heroes throughout the galaxy as the story of his sacrifice spread to every world, inspiring countless beings to rebuild their civilizations with the courage and determination that humans had shown. President Carter worked with leaders from liberated worlds to establish the Galactic Freedom Charter that guaranteed the right of every species to determine its own destiny without interference. Dr. Kevin Walsh and Nurse Betty Clark found themselves treating alien patients alongside humans as the former enemies worked together to heal the wounds of war. The reconstruction of Earth began with help from grateful alien species who provided advanced technology and resources to repair the damage caused by the Confederation bombardment. Admiral Blake was promoted to lead the new galactic defense force that would protect the freedom of all species and prevent any future attempts at galactic domination. Children, like young Amy Foster, grew up in a galaxy where humans and aliens work side by side as equals, learning about different cultures and technologies in schools that welcome students from hundreds of worlds. The memorial to the heroes of the liberation was built on the site of the White House, where President Carter had made his famous declaration that humanity would stand rather than surrender. Vex became Earth's first alien ambassador and worked to establish trade and cultural exchange between humanity and the Crystal Collective while helping other species reconnect with their lost heritage. The former Confederation research stations were converted into museums and educational centers, where beings from across the galaxy could learn about the importance of freedom and the cost of tyranny. Commander Morrison, now an admiral himself, often stood in the observation deck of the rebuilt Earth orbital station and watched ships from hundreds of worlds coming and going in peaceful cooperation. The galaxy had learned that freedom was worth any price and that even the smallest species could make a difference when they chose to stand up against oppression. Teachers like Greg Thompson found themselves instructing classes that included alien students who wanted to learn about human history and the courage that had broken the chains of slavery. The story of humanity's stand against the galaxy became legend on thousands of worlds, where beings told their children about the species that had chosen death over submission. Years later, as peace and prosperity spread throughout the galaxy, beings everywhere remembered the day when humanity had shown that no empire could stand against the combined will of free peoples who refused to surrender their liberty. The stars themselves seemed brighter now that they shone down on worlds where beings could choose their own paths and dream their own dreams without fear of psychic masters or alien oppression. The first energy beams from the Confederation fleet struck Earth's atmosphere and lit up the sky like deadly aurora as cities across the planet began to burn under the alien bombardment that was meant to force humanity into immediate surrender. Commander Jake Morrison watched from the Orbital Defense Center as Earth's 12 remaining warships rose to meet the alien armada in a battle that everyone knew was hopeless but had to be fought anyway. The human ships were like gnats attacking eagles as they darted between the massive Confederation vessels and fired everything they had at weapon systems and shield generators, while enemy fire lit up the darkness around them. USS Phoenix is taking heavy damage, reported Lieutenant Greg Thompson, as one of the human destroyers was caught by 3 enemy cruisers and began to break apart under concentrated fire. Captain Lisa Rodriguez commanded the USS Defiance and led her ship in a suicidal ramming attack against a Confederation dreadnought that was targeting civilian evacuation centers in North America. "This is for humanity," she transmitted as her ship struck the alien vessel's bridge section and both ships vanished in a ball of nuclear fire that briefly outshone the sun on the surface. General Peter Hayes coordinated the ground defense from bunkers beneath major cities as alien landing craft began descending through the bombardment to deploy invasion forces. The aliens had never encountered a species that continued fighting after orbital bombardment began, and they were unprepared for the fierce resistance they met from human forces who refused to surrender. In New York City, firefighter Sam Johnson led civilian volunteers armed with improvised weapons against alien soldiers who had landed in Central Park expecting to find a defeated population ready for enslavement. "They're just machines following orders," Johnson shouted to his team as they attacked the alien troops with mining charges and stolen energy weapons. "But we're fighting for our freedom." The alien soldiers were confused by human tactics that relied on individual initiative rather than coordinated group movements, and their psychic coordination was useless against minds they could not control. Dr. Kevin Walsh worked in underground medical centers, treating casualties from energy weapons, while Nurse Betty Clark organized teams to rescue civilians from the burning ruins of cities. Meanwhile, at the galactic core, Admiral Blake watched helplessly as the quantum resonators slowly charged while Confederation forces finally located the Architect facility and began their assault. Multiple enemy fleets dropping out of hyperspace, reported Captain Rodriguez, as hundreds of alien ships appeared around the neutron star system and began moving toward the facility. The rebel ships led by Vex fought desperately to protect the ancient installation, but they were vastly outnumbered, and their weapons were no match for the Confederation's newest warships. The resonators are at 60% charge, called out Dr. Amanda Bell from the activation chamber, where she worked frantically to complete the sequence that would free the galaxy. The facility shuddered under enemy fire as Confederation forces began breaching the outer defenses and sending boarding parties to stop the activation at any cost. Blake led the defense of the critical systems while rebel warriors from dozens of species fought side by side against the alien troops who served the psychic masters without question. They're trying to reach the central core, Blake shouted over the sound of energy weapons as the battle raged through the ancient corridors where millions of years of dust was being stirred by the valence back. On Earth, the orbital battle was reaching its climax as the last human warships made their final attacks against impossible odds, while Admiral Korthak's flagship began charging its planet-killing weapon. Commander Morrison watched as the USS Liberty's sister ship USS Constitution flew directly into the mouth of the alien flagship's main gun and detonated its nuclear warheads inside the weapon system. The explosion tore through the Confederation flagship and sent Admiral Korthak into a rage as he realized that the humans were willing to die rather than submit to alien rule. These creatures are insane. The reptilian admiral snarled as he ordered his remaining ships to begin systematic destruction of Earth's major population centers. The bombardment intensified as energy beams carved through cities and vaporized mountains, while human resistance continued from underground bunkers and hidden bases. President Carter broadcast from the White House bunker where he continued to coordinate the global defense even as Washington, D.C. burned around him. To every human listening to this transmission, Carter said as explosions shook the building above, "Remember that we chose to stand and that choice matters more than the outcome." At the galactic core, the quantum resonators reached 80% charge as Dr. Bell worked to keep the ancient systems stable while the battle for the facility raged around her. Engineer Tony Martinez made the ultimate sacrifice as he manually held together a damaged power coupling that was critical to the charging process. Staying at his post even as energy feedback began to kill him. "The resonators are destabilizing," Martinez called out as his body began to fail. "I can hold them for maybe 10 more minutes." The facility's defenses finally collapsed as Confederation forces reached the central chamber, where the quantum resonators were building toward the activation that would shatter psychic control across the galaxy. Blake and her remaining defenders made their last stand in the activation chamber as alien troops poured through breached barriers and began firing at the ancient Architect technology. 95% charge, Dr. Bell shouted as Martinez collapsed over the power coupling but continued to hold the connection with his dying hands. The lead Confederation officer raised his weapon to destroy the resonators, but Martinez found the strength for one final act of defiance and triggered the activation sequence manually. "For freedom," the engineer gasped as quantum energy erupted from the facility and raced across the galaxy at faster than light speed, carrying the liberation signal to every enslaved world in Confederation space. The psychic chains that had bound 3,000 species for millions of years suddenly shattered as the resonance wave swept through the galaxy and restored free will to countless billions of beings on Earth. Admiral Korthak suddenly screamed in agony as his own psychic conditioning was broken, and he remembered what his people had been before they became part of the Confederation's ruling council. Across the alien fleet, ships began turning on each other as enslaved crews remembered their true nature and rose up against their psychic masters who had controlled them for so long. The galaxy erupted in revolution as species after species threw off the mental chains that had made them willing slaves and turned their weapons against the Confederation forces that had oppressed them. Admiral Susan Blake stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty and watched as the combined human rebel fleet prepared to jump into hyperspace for what everyone knew would be a one-way mission to the galactic core, while behind them Earth's remaining ships took defensive positions around their homeworld. The fleet consisted of only 15 vessels against the might of the entire Galactic Confederation, but each ship carried volunteers who had chosen to risk everything for the chance to free not just humanity, but every enslaved species in the galaxy. Captain Rodriguez commanded the escort destroyers that would protect the Liberty during the dangerous journey through Confederation space, where thousands of enemy ships patrolled the hyperspace lanes leading to the galactic core. All ships report ready for jump, came the voice of Lieutenant Tony Martinez from the communications station as the fleet prepared to leave human space for the last time. Blake gave the order and watched as the stars stretched into lines of light before the fleet entered hyperspace and began racing toward the ancient architect facility that might hold the key to galactic freedom. The journey took 18 hours of constant travel through the most heavily defended space in the galaxy, where Confederation patrols searched for rebels and any ships that showed signs of independent thought. "Admiral, we have multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace behind us," Rodriguez reported as her sensors detected the approaching enemy fleet that had been tracking their movements. The first battle began when 3 Confederation cruisers tried to intercept the human ships near a mining system where enslaved workers had been extracting rare minerals for thousands of years. Rodriguez led her destroyers in a desperate attack against the larger alien vessels, using tactics that relied on speed and unpredictability rather than superior firepower. The human ships darted between asteroids and used their smaller size to avoid the massive energy beams that could vaporize them in seconds, striking at weapon systems and engines before retreating to safety. "Their shields are adapting to our weapons," called out Lieutenant Martinez as he watched the alien defenses strengthen with each attack. Blake ordered the fleet to continue toward the galactic core, while Rodriguez's ships held off the pursuing enemy forces in a running battle that cost them 2 destroyers but allowed the main fleet to escape. The survivors regrouped near a red giant star where they met with rebel ships commanded by Vex and other resistance leaders who had been fighting the Confederation for millions of years. The facility is hidden inside the accretion disk of a neutron star, Vex explained as crystalline features reflected the red light. The radiation and gravitational forces make it impossible for normal ships to approach. The ancient architect facility had been built in the most dangerous location possible to prevent the Confederation from finding and destroying it. But reaching it would require flying through plasma storms and gravitational anomalies that could tear ships apart. Back on Earth, the final preparations were complete as President Carter addressed the world one last time before the alien deadline expired in less than 36 hours. "We stand here not just for ourselves, but for every enslaved being in the galaxy," Carter said as his words were broadcast to hidden rebel cells throughout Confederation space. General Hayes had positioned his forces throughout major cities where underground bunkers provided protection from orbital bombardment, while surface teams prepared to fight alien landing forces. Dr. Kevin Walsh worked in emergency medical stations while volunteers like Nurse Betty Clark organized supplies for treating casualties from energy weapons that could burn through concrete and steel. The Confederation fleet began entering the solar system, led by Admiral Korthak aboard his massive flagship that carried enough firepower to destroy planets. Hundreds of ships spreading out to surround Earth in an unbreakable blockade. Commander Jake Morrison now led Earth's orbital defense grid from the command center buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, where he coordinated the planet's few remaining weapons with the 12 ships of the home defense fleet. "Sir, we're detecting over 800 enemy vessels taking position around Earth," reported Lieutenant Greg Thompson from the sensor station as the alien armada completed its deployment at the galactic core. Admiral Blake's fleet finally reached the neutron star system, where the architect facility waited, hidden in the swirling plasma and deadly radiation of the accretion disk. "All ships prepare for final approach," Blake ordered as Her navigators plotted a course through the gravitational maze that would either lead them to salvation or tear them apart. The USS Liberty led the way into the plasma storm as energy discharges lit up the darkness and gravitational waves threatened to crush the human ships like insects. Captain Rodriguez guided her remaining destroyers through the chaos while rebel ships followed close behind, their alien designs better suited for the extreme conditions but still struggling against the neutron star's deadly embrace. The facility finally appeared before them like a massive city floating in the heart of the storm, ancient structures that had been built by a civilization that understood the true cost of freedom. "Docking bay is opening," called out the sensors operator as the architect facility recognized their presence and welcomed the fleet into its protective embrace. Blake led the landing party into corridors that had been empty for millions of years, while Dr. Amanda Bell's science team began analyzing the quantum resonance technology that could break psychic control across the galaxy. "The activation sequence will take at least 6 hours," Dr. Bell reported after studying the ancient systems, "and will be completely defenseless during the charging process." Meanwhile, on Earth, the final ultimatum was delivered as Admiral Korthek's reptilian face appeared on every screen and communication device across the planet. "Humans, you have reached the end of your defiance," the alien admiral said with cold satisfaction. "Surrender now or watch your world burn." President Carter's response was broadcast from the White House, where he stood surrounded by the flags of every nation on Earth. "We choose to stand," Carter said simply, and those 3 words became the battle cry that echoed across the galaxy as the countdown to war reached 0. The orbital bombardment began as Confederation ships opened fire on Earth's major cities while the planet's tiny fleet rose to meet them in a battle that would decide the fate of every free being in the galaxy. At the galactic core, the quantum resonators began their charging sequence as ancient architect technology came to life for the first time in millions of years, ready to shatter the chains that had bound the galaxy in darkness for so long. Captain Rodriguez guided her stealth ship through the asteroid field on the edge of Confederation space, where long-range sensors had detected unusual energy signatures that might indicate the presence of other rebels or resistance fighters who opposed the Galactic Empire. The ship's crew worked in complete silence as they approached what appeared to be a damaged alien vessel drifting among the rocks. But as they drew closer, it became clear that the ship was not damaged, but deliberately hidden and waiting for something. "Captain," whispered Lieutenant Tony Martinez from the sensor station, "I'm detecting life signs aboard that vessel, and they don't match any known Confederation species." Rodriguez made the decision to attempt contact and transmitted a simple mathematical sequence that any intelligent species would recognize, hoping that whoever was aboard the hidden ship would understand that humans came in peace. The response came immediately as a beam of light connected the 2 ships and a strange melodic voice filled the bridge. Speaking in heavily accented English, "Human vessel, you are brave or foolish to venture into forbidden space." The main screen flickered to life and showed a being unlike anything in human databases, a creature that appeared to be made of living crystal with faceted surfaces that reflected light in beautiful patterns as it moved. "I am Vex of the Crystal Collective," the alien said, "and we have been waiting for someone like you for longer than your species has existed." Rodriguez felt her heart racing as she realized they had made contact with actual rebels who were fighting against the Confederation, beings who might be willing to help humanity in their desperate struggle. "We know of your people and the ultimatum you have received," Vex continued, "and we know that you possess the immunity that we have prayed for." Across countless generations, the crystal being explained that the Galactic Confederation was not the voluntary alliance it claimed to be, but a vast slave empire held together by psychic domination that kept member species obedient and compliant. "Every species that joins the Confederation loses its free will," Vex said sadly. "Their minds are shackled and they become willing servants who believe they are partners in a great galactic civilization." Rodriguez learned that Vex's people had been among the first to be conquered by the Confederation millions of years ago, and that small groups of rebels had been hiding throughout the galaxy ever since, waiting for someone immune to psychic control. The ruling council consists of the original psychic species who discovered how to dominate other minds, Vex explained. They have spent eons building an empire of slaves who do not even know they are enslaved. The crystal being transmitted coordinates to hidden rebel bases throughout the galaxy and explained that they had been guarding caches of ancient architect technology for millions of years, waiting for a species that could use it back on Earth. Dr. Karen White's research team was working with the new information provided by the rebels and making breakthrough discoveries about the nature of psychic control and how human neural patterns provided natural resistance. The aliens use quantum entanglement to link minds across vast distances, Dr. White explained to the Project Last Stand team. But human consciousness operates on frequencies that cannot be entangled. Meanwhile, Commander Jake Morrison led a strike team on a desperate mission to capture a Confederation research station where the aliens were studying human prisoners taken from the outer colonies. The assault was swift and brutal as Morrison's team fought their way through automated defenses and alien guards to reach the research labs where they found horrors that would haunt them forever. Human test subjects were connected to machines that tried to map their neural patterns while alien scientists attempted to find ways to break their natural immunity to psychic control. They're trying to figure out how to make us susceptible to their mind control, Morrison said as he freed the prisoners. Which means they see us as a real threat to their entire system. The rescued prisoners told stories of what they had witnessed in Confederation space. Entire worlds where billions of beings worked like machines without complaint or question. Their minds locked in artificial contentment while their bodies labored until death on Earth. The resistance was growing as ordinary people prepared for war despite knowing the odds were hopeless. Teachers like Greg Thompson organized secret communication networks while mechanics like Maria Santos built improvised weapons from mining equipment. Dr. Kevin Walsh worked in underground medical facilities preparing to treat casualties from energy weapons, while volunteers like Nurse Betty Clark stockpiled supplies for the coming battle. President Carter met with world leaders and announced that humanity would not surrender regardless of the consequences. That freedom was worth any price and that they would fight even if it meant extinction. The announcement was broadcast across the galaxy and reached rebel cells on thousands of worlds where enslaved beings felt something stir in the depths of their controlled minds. A memory of what they had once been. Vex contacted Rodriguez again with urgent news that the Confederation was mobilizing massive fleets to crush the human rebellion before it could spread to other species. Your defiance is already causing problems for them. The crystal being explained? Some of the controlled species are beginning to experience glitches in their programming. The rebels revealed the location of the last major architect facility hidden deep in the galactic core, a massive installation that contained the key to breaking psychic control across the entire galaxy simultaneously. The architects built a quantum resonance network before they were destroyed, Vex said. If activated, it would shatter the mental chains, binding every enslaved species at once. Rodriguez realized that this was humanity's only chance to not just survive, but to free the entire galaxy from the Confederation's tyranny. But reaching the galactic core would require fighting through the heart of enemy territory. Admiral Blake began assembling a joint human-rebel fleet for the most dangerous mission in galactic history. While on Earth, the final preparations were made for the defense of humanity's homeworld. General Hayes positioned troops in major cities and prepared for orbital bombardment, while civilians like firefighter Sam Johnson organized evacuation procedures for when the aliens began their assault. With only 5 days remaining before the ultimatum expired, President Carter gave the order that would seal humanity's fate, authorizing the mission to the galactic core. While Earth's tiny fleet prepared to face the full might of the Confederation, the rebels provided intelligence about Confederation fleet movements and warned that Admiral Korthek was already moving toward Earth with enough firepower to reduce the planet to molten slag. As the countdown entered its final phase, ordinary humans like postal worker Danny Rice and store clerk Helen Parks volunteered for combat duty, knowing they would likely die, but believing that freedom was worth the ultimate sacrifice. The emergency session in the White House Situation Room had been going for 12 hours straight, and President John Carter could see the exhaustion on every face around the long conference table, but sleep was a luxury they could not afford with. Only 26 days remaining before the alien ultimatum expired. General Peter Hayes sat across from Admiral Susan Blake, and both military leaders had been arguing for hours about whether humanity should surrender or fight, their voices growing louder with each passing hour as the weight of an impossible decision pressed down on everyone in the room. Dr. Amanda Bell stood at the front of the room, pointing to charts and graphs that showed the technological gap between humanity and the Galactic Confederation, her analysis painting a picture so bleak that several officials had already suggested immediate surrender based on the energy readings from their demonstration. Dr. Bell explained as she gestured to the data. A single one of their smaller ships could destroy our entire Pacific Fleet in minutes. Engineer Tony Martinez had been studying the alien technology samples that the Endeavour managed to collect, and his findings were equally disturbing, showing that human weapons and defenses were thousands of years behind what the aliens possessed. Mr. President, General Hayes said as he leaned forward, "We have to face reality and accept that fighting these aliens would be suicide for our entire species." Admiral Blake slammed her hand on the table and glared at the general with fire in her eyes. "We cannot simply hand over 70% of our population to become slaves." Dr. Karen White from the Quantum Research Division had been quietly working at her laptop throughout the meeting and suddenly looked up with excitement in her voice. "I found something strange in the alien communication patterns." Everyone turned to look at the young scientist as she connected her computer to the main display and showed them wave patterns and frequency analysis. That meant nothing to most people in the room. "The aliens keep mentioning something called the Lost Ones and Forbidden Zones in the galaxy," Dr. White continued. "And there are gaps in their historical records that suggest entire civilizations have simply vanished." President Carter studied the data and felt a small spark of hope for the first time since the crisis began. "What do you think this means?" "I think the Galactic Confederation has enemies, or at least there were civilizations that successfully resisted them in the past." Dr. White replied. Captain Lisa Rodriguez had returned to Earth with Commander Morrison and now spoke up from her position near the wall. "During our encounter, I noticed that the aliens seemed surprised by our neural patterns." Dr. Bell nodded thoughtfully and pulled up another set of readings. "Human brain activity shows unique quantum signatures that don't match any of the alien species in their databases." Tony Martinez suddenly stood up and began pacing as an idea formed in his mind. "What if that's why they want to eliminate us instead of just conquering us like they did with the other species?" The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications of what the engineer was suggesting, that humanity might possess some natural defense against whatever methods the aliens use to control other species. Admiral Blake was the first to speak. "If we have some kind of immunity to their control methods, then we need to find a way to use that advantage." President Carter authorized the formation of Project Last Stand and ordered every available scientist and military expert to work around the clock to find weaknesses in the alien technology or ways to exploit humanity's unique characteristics. Meanwhile, Captain Rodriguez led a secret mission to investigate the ruins on Kepler 442b that had been discovered years earlier but never fully explored, hoping to find clues about the civilizations that the aliens had mentioned in their databases. The small exploration team landed on the distant world and found massive structures buried beneath centuries of dust and debris, buildings that clearly belonged to a highly advanced civilization that had vanished long ago. "These aren't just ruins," Rodriguez said as she examined the walls covered in strange symbols. "This is a warning." The team's archaeologist, Dr. Kevin Walsh, worked to translate the alien writing and discovered that the structures contained a message left by a species called the Architects who had fought against the Galactic Confederation. Millions of years ago, they knew the Confederation would continue to expand and enslave other species, Dr. Walsh explained. So they left behind technology and information for future civilizations to use. Back on Earth, Dr. Karen White made a breakthrough while analyzing the quantum signatures from human test subjects and discovered that human neural patterns were naturally resistant to a form of psychic manipulation that the aliens use to control their subjects. The Confederation doesn't just conquer species militarily, she announced to the Project Last Stand team. They use some kind of mental domination to keep them obedient. The revelation changed everything because it meant that the aliens saw humanity not just as another species to be conquered, but as a direct threat to their entire system of control. General Hayes began training civilian volunteers for guerrilla warfare while Admiral Blake prepared Earth's small fleet for what everyone knew would likely be a one-way mission. But across the planet, ordinary people were stepping forward to volunteer for the resistance teachers like Greg Thompson organized underground communication networks, while mechanics like Maria Santos modified civilian vehicles for combat use, and in hospitals, doctors like Kevin Walsh trained medical teams to treat casualties from energy weapons. President Carter addressed the world and told them the truth about what humanity was facing, that an alien empire wanted to enslave the human race and that they had less than 3 weeks to prepare for war. The response was not panic, but determination, as people from every nation and walk of life began working together to build weapons and fortifications, knowing that they were fighting not just for their own survival but for their freedom. As the countdown continued, alien surveillance platforms appeared throughout human space and began monitoring all communications and ship movements. But the aliens had underestimated human ingenuity and stubbornness. Hidden deep in the Kepler ruins, the exploration team discovered something that would change the course of the war: a map showing the locations of ancient architect facilities scattered throughout the galaxy and the technology needed to break the psychic chains that bound thousands of species to the Confederation. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Endeavour and watched the stars bend around them as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the blue glow of hyperspace fading to reveal the cold darkness of space near the edge of human territory where no ship had gone before and where they hoped to find new worlds for humanity to call home. The bridge crew worked quietly at their stations while Jake studied the sensor readings that showed nothing but empty space and distant stars. But then Lieutenant Lisa Rodriguez at the communications station suddenly straightened in her chair and turned toward him with wide eyes that told him something was very wrong. "Commander, I'm picking up massive energy signatures directly ahead," Lisa said as her fingers danced across the control panel. "These readings are unlike anything in our databases." Jake moved to stand behind her station and looked at the display that showed dozens of large objects moving toward them at incredible speed, objects that were clearly artificial and far larger than any ship humanity had ever built. "Red alert," Jake called out as alarms began to sound throughout the ship. "All hands to battle stations and raise shields." The main screen flickered to life and showed the approaching fleet of alien vessels, each one easily 10 times the size of the Endeavour, with sleek hulls that gleamed like polished metal and weapons arrays that could probably destroy a small moon. Captain Greg Thompson's voice came over the intercom from the engine room, where he was working to give them more power. "Commander, these ships are using technology we've never seen before, and their energy output is off the charts." The alien fleet suddenly stopped just outside weapons range, and Jake felt his heart pounding as he realized that humanity had just made first contact with an alien civilization. But these were not the peaceful explorers that scientists had hoped to meet. A new voice filled the bridge as the aliens opened a communication channel, the words spoken in perfect English by a deep voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. "Human vessel, you will prepare to be boarded, and your crew will submit to interrogation by order of the Galactic Confederation." Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward to respond, knowing that his next words might determine the fate of not just his crew, but all of humanity. "This is Commander Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel USS Endeavour," he said in the steadiest voice he could manage. "We come in peace and seek only to explore this region of space." The alien voice laughed coldly, and the sound sent chills down Jake's spine as he realized that these beings had no interest in peaceful contact. "Your species will surrender immediately and accept placement under Confederation authority," the voice continued. "You have 30 of your Earth days to comply with our demands." Lisa worked frantically at her station to analyze the incoming transmission, while Jake tried to process what was happening. The reality that humanity was being given an ultimatum by beings they had never known existed. "Commander," Lisa whispered, "I'm detecting over 3,000 different ship designs in that fleet, and each one represents a different alien species." The main screen changed to show the image of a massive reptilian creature with scales that shimmered like oil and eyes that burned with cold intelligence. This was Admiral Korthak of the Zephyrian Empire, and the being who would decide humanity's fate. "Your world and all human colonies will submit to Confederation rule," Admiral Korthak said as his forked tongue flicked out to taste the air. "You will disarm all military forces and provide 70% of your population for labor assignments throughout the galaxy." Jake felt his blood turn to ice as he heard the terms of surrender that would essentially enslave the human race and turn Earth into a resource extraction facility for alien masters. "And if we refuse?" Jake asked. Though he already feared the answer, Admiral Korthak's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Then your species will be eliminated as a threat to galactic stability to demonstrate their power." One of the alien ships fired a single beam of energy at a small moon orbiting a nearby planet, and Jake watched in horror as the celestial body simply vanished in a flash of light. "Reduced to atoms in less than a second, you have 30 days to contact your leaders and arrange for surrender," Admiral Korthak said. "We will be monitoring all human communications, and any attempt to flee or fight will result in immediate destruction." The transmission ended, and Jake stood in stunned silence as the alien fleet moved to surround the Endeavor, their ships taking positions that would allow them to destroy the human vessel in seconds. "If needed, Commander," came the voice of Dr. Amanda Bell from the science station. "I'm analyzing the energy readings from that weapon discharge, and the power levels are beyond anything we thought possible." Jake knew that they had to get back to Earth and warn humanity about the threat they faced. But he also knew that the aliens would be watching their every move. "Lisa, send a coded message to Earth Command," he ordered. "Use the emergency protocols and tell them we need to speak with President Carter immediately." As the Endeavor began its journey back toward Earth under the watchful eyes of the alien fleet, Jake wondered if they were carrying news of humanity's first contact with alien life or its death sentence. The weight of 30 days pressing down on him like a mountain as he realized that the countdown to humanity's possible extinction had already begun.